Well, this came across my feed this morning from Reuters, and I'm not a big fan of Reuters, but this was an interesting take, an interesting article. China coal mine approvals surge despite climate pledges. In Shanghai, Beijing, I like how they say Shanghai / Beijing to make sure they're covering all their bases. Dateline August 6, 2019. Approvals for new coal mine construction in China have surged in 2019. Government documents showed, with Beijing expecting consumption of the commodity to rise in the coming years, even if as it steps up its fight against smog and greenhouse gas emissions. So did you hear that? China is expecting consumption of the commodity to rise in the coming years. But we thought China was getting rid of this. Yeah, right. And here's a file photo. A worker speaks as he loads coal in a truck at a depot near a coal mine from the state-owned Longmei group on the outskirts of Jiji in China. That's 2015 photo. I'm not sure why they can't update the photo, but whatever. Long-term cuts in coal consumption are a key part of China's energy, environment, and climate goals. But the five-fold increase in new mine approvals in the first half of 2019 suggests China's targets still provide ample room for shorter-term growth. So remember that. Long-term cuts in coal consumption are a part of Chinese environmental goals, but they just said China expects consumption of the commodity to rise in the coming years. Those two things are mutually exclusive. Oh, well, they're really not mutually exclusive. You can have an increasing consumption of it in the short term and a long-term reduction in consumption. Theoretically, it ain't going to happen, my friends. Coal is here to stay. China's energy regulator gave the go-ahead to build 141 million tons of new annual coal production capacity. Now, capacity, this is where the green people always run this. They say capacity. They talk about, what's it called? I can't remember. Nameplate, where they have the certain amount of wattage that they say we can get. But the capacity is not the same thing as actual production. All right, it's just not. So they'll have nameplate capacity of, we'll say freaking 1 kilowatt. We'll just use that for example, but they're only producing 300 watts, if that makes sense. So they'll always use nameplate capacity as, this is what the green people say all the time, this has nameplate capacity of this, but they're not ever coming near that at all. And you got to watch out for these. It's very scandalous when you think about it. When they say, we have nameplate capacity, they'll never say nameplate capacity. They don't want to say that because they know they're going to feed on your ignorance. So here they're saying China's energy regulator gave the go-ahead to build 141 million tons of new annual coal production capacity. But the interesting thing in coal production capacity and nameplate is that nameplate, while it will never be achieved to the extent that they say, coal production capacity absolutely would. Just dig, mine, and you'll get more capacity for sure. Compared to 25 million tons over the whole of last year. So hear this now. China has approved 141 million tons of new capacity for coal compared to 25 million tons over the whole of last year. That is a factor of 6. The projects include new mines in the region of Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, Shaanxi that are part of a national strategy to consolidate output at dedicated coal production bases, as well as expansions of existing coal areas, the National Energy Administration showed, which did not respond for requests for comment. Beijing aims to raise the share of non-fossil fuels in its overall mix to 15% by the end of next year, from 14.3% currently, and to 20% by 2030. It's cut the share of coal to 59% last year, down from 68.5% in 2012. Well, apparently they cut it, but their people are freezing to death. About a year and a half ago, I did this long blog post, which has since been deleted because I didn't keep up my website. Just FYI, if you're going to do a website, make sure you save your post for sure. Which talked about China and the people freezing to death. It was freaking nuts, man. They had a picture of some kid walking to school with ice on his face. It's still pissing me off to this day because of people need coal to stay warm. The rich people in the West say, we don't need coal because they got the money to afford other things. But the people in these places, they need coal to stay warm. They need fossil fuels to stay warm. Only can the rich elitists say how bad these things are. Anyway, so China might have dropped its share of coal from 68.5 in 2012 to 59% last year, but now they're ramping it up big time from 25 million tons over the whole of last year to 141 million tons of new annual coal production capacity, newly approved on top of what they've had before. But it has also promised to adopt the highest possible ambition when it reviews its climate change pledges next year, with one government think tank recommending China impose a mandatory cap on coal consumption in its 5-year plan. We'll see how that goes with your citizens who are freezing to death. We'll see how long the communists allow that to continue on, because at some point, people get sick of that, especially while the communists are flying over the world in their friggin' jet planes, living large, and the people are freezing to death. And then on top of that, they're seeing what's going on in Hong Kong right now. They say, we don't have to live like this. But while smog-prone regions like Hebei and Beijing have already cut coal use and shut hundreds of small mines and power plants, China is still allowing for significant increases in coal production and coal-fired power generation. That has piled pressure on utilities to use clean combustion technology. So here's some environmental Greenpeace energy and analysts said many of the newly approved projects would likely replace smaller or depleted old mines. So some old mines are smaller and they don't have any coal left, so they're going to approve projects to replace those and probably ramp up capacity, which is what we just talked about. And the lady from Greenpeace says, however, it's alarming that China's energy planning seems to be driving at roughly maintaining current levels of coal output for the coming decade or two, which is very hard to reconcile with the goal of the Paris Agreement on climate change. It's not planning to driving roughly maintaining current levels. It's increasing it by a factor of 6 over the last few years in terms of their approval for coal capacity production. Especially given that oil and gas consumption is still increasing, it's imperative that coal use starts falling again after rebounding for the past 3 years. Coal use starts falling again after rebounding for the past 3 years. How many people have said China is getting rid of its coal production? You guys fall for this stuff. The propaganda from the climateistas, the climate fearmongers. You guys fall for this left and right. This lady from Greenpeace right now is saying China's coal use has been rebounding for the past 3 years because they recognize all the green turbines, wind, wave technology, photovoltaic, geothermal. It will not do what we need to live and what we want to expanding consumption. We're going to continue to consume, not just us in the West, but the rising wannabe wealthier populations in places like India and China, and to rely solely on photovoltaic, geothermal, wind technology, wave energy. It's just, you're not going to get the job done. Chinese coal output rose 2.6% in the first half of 2019 to 1.76 billion tons. Industry groups still expect coal power capacity to increase over the next few years, with investments in nuclear and renewables still insufficient to cover rising energy demand. That's it. Demand is growing. It's going to be met by something. It's going to be met. The research unit of the China State Grid Corporation last month forecast that total coal-fired capacity would peak at basically 1.3 gigawatts, which would mean an increase of about 200 to 300 gigawatts. So we take our trusty computer, our trusty calculator, and it's going to rise to, we'll just say 1.3 or 1,300 gigawatts. All right, so we take, which will increase about 200, let's say 250, divide by, let's say 1050. That is a 24% increase in capacity, coal-fired capacity. That's we'll just say 25% increase in coal-fired capacity. That is not a reduction of not only consumption, but of production either. A study published earlier this year suggested China's targets would allow the construction of another 290 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity in the coming years. China is convinced it can continue to raise coal production and consumption while significantly reducing emissions. It has made ultra-low emissions technology mandatory. Okay, I don't care. So what's old Thomas Friedman saying about this? Because remember, he was saying China is the way of the future because they were basically benevolent dictators. Yeah, it's reality always sets in, man. Your dreams of this always come crashing down with reality. It's let's see, this guy, the World Coal Association says it's not about transitioning away from any one source of energy. It's about transitioning to cleaner energy, and coal has a significant role. I love that. I love it because if you are worried about CO2, this bothers you. I am not worried about CO2, as I've told you many times. I'm sure we'll lose subscribers from this, but bothers me not in the least. People got to survive. No, you survive with that thing right there, that fossil fuel, most efficient storage of energy that man has out there. That is actually a renewable, by the way. You know that, right? I mean, you know what coal is, right? That's a renewable energy. Yeah, it takes a long time for all the body's decomposition and whatnot, but that does get renewed into other coal for the future for sure. So coal is evil. They say it's a fossil fuel. It's fossil, but it's renewable. It does. The trees, the animals, the people, somehow they get into the ground, and at some point they do become coal. So anyway, this is good stuff. I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy for those the regular working folks in China to have access to more coal, electricity, and energy as a whole to keep their bodies warm, to be able to raise their families with the energy that we have in the West that we take for granted. So good stuff. All right, we'll see you next time.